All right, so this is going to be a real basic screencast to kind of show some folks how to potentially work on the Stars Without Number Foundry system. And this is the wintersleepAI forked version, but all of the same concepts could be applied on the original Spice King version. So I'm on an Ubuntu operating system here with not a lot set up outside of having a terminal, Visual Studio Code, Firefox, and I have Node already installed at the appropriate version. Now, Visual Studio Code is a great lightweight IDE, so it's what I'm going to be using to work on the software, and then we'll be using Firefox to do some basic debugging. So at a high level, some things that you might not know or need to know is that the source file, the source folder is where all of the code lives for this project. The code lives largely in a language called TypeScript. So TypeScript is, let's say, almost like a wrapper language on top of JavaScript. You write TypeScript, it's a little bit more strict. It provides some more additional functionality. And when TypeScript gets compiled, it compiles down to JavaScript. Now, it adds this kind of extra layer in here that's not in a lot of Foundry systems, but this interface, this way of doing it, kind of helps write a little bit cleaner code. Allows us to do things like define types. We can do things like define union types, where we can say a particular value has to be, so here we're defining a type called actor type, and we're saying an actor type must be a string called character, or a string called NPC, or a string title called ship. And then the code will do things like making sure that if you're referencing an actor type, it's one of these three things, one of these three options. So if you know JavaScript, you don't know TypeScript, there's a couple of things that might be a little bit odd, but the barrier is not too high. Now, the important thing to note here is when we're running this, Spice did a good job of setting up a good build infrastructure, and we're not going to get into it too much, but there's a gulp file, which seems to be the main compilation component here. So this will go through, read the source files, generate the appropriate output files. It will do things like compile YAML, the YML files, which are simple markup files, down to JSON. So this is kind of our core system file that's written in YAML, and this will get compiled down to JavaScript, a whole bunch of other things. So when we have our terminal open in the appropriate project repository, we will just simply run npm, which is our node run build watch. So this is saying, go ahead and compile the code, run the code, do what the gulp file tells you to do, and watch for changes. And as there's changes, so as we make changes to these files, what we'll see is that the gulp file will pick this up and it will recompile the appropriate JavaScript files. So we kick this off and it runs. So if you have the appropriate version of Node running, everything should work. Now, Node 14 is the version you want. It's a little bit of a hoop to jump through on Ubuntu. You have to make sure that you kind of uninstall the default Node or npm package, and then the default Node docs or npm docs. I can't remember exactly what it is that you have to do, but it's something you have to do to become a little bit of a pain. So this is just going through the processes. It's generating some files. One file inside of here is compiled, and it's generated from this. So you can see, if you look through this file, it will tell you whatever that file is. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. So there's a lot that will happen in here. You can just kind of view it as magic or voodoo and ignore a lot of it for now. Now also, I've been kind of learning this system, both TypeScript, Spice's basic infrastructure, and as well as Foundry, kind of on the fly. I tend to be a pretty, let's say, lazy and dirty, sloppy coder, so I'm going to say things that might be wrong or might not be the best way of doing it, but I'm trying just to get things done. So we're able to go through and kick off this build script in another window. I'm just using Biobu here, which is just basically tabs on terminals. We need to go through and tell Foundry to run. So we're saying npm run Foundry. Now in my setup, you can see it over here in this folder, is we have our source file. I've copied over the source code from Foundry into this directory right here, and the code is going to get compiled down into this dist folder, this distribution folder. So this is kind of what the output looks like. This is what would get packaged and sent around. You can see that there'd be JSON in here instead of YAML files. If you looked inside of the code, you'll see JavaScript files as well. So code will get compiled, it will point down to here. We follow the instructions in this README to get everything set up, and now we've run. So if we're running, we should be able to go to our local host, port 30,000, and we need to go through and go ahead and kick off a game. So this is a test system that I've been working on. We go ahead and launch the system, and we're in. So here is just some basic data that I have inside of here. Now, a real important thing, if you haven't done this before, is, and I'd strongly recommend watching Spaceman Dev's videos on YouTube on macro development, and it kind of does a really good job of doing the primer, but more or less you want to get the console open. On Firefox, and I believe on Chrome, it's F12, but I could be wrong. And what you're going to rely on a lot is the console. The console is basically messages that are going to be sent out, and you can go ahead and clear your console if you want to see it, but you'll see things inside of here, and there's a lot of really great things you can do. So a lot of you'll have to go through and you'll say, I'm trying to look at what do I have here. So I select a token, I do underscore token, I say actor, this gets me the actor, and then I can say what is the data here. You know, the data is effectively the data model for a particular actor. So these are all the things about it that we build the character sheets and we use. Right? So here we have our token. Again, it's this thing. Actor is the general actor class, and then data.data. If we just said token.actor, we'll be able to look at kind of all of the information about this actor here. Now, some of this is mine. I need to fix this, but you can see a lot of JavaScript kind of stuff in here. There's some kind of common utilities, such as the name, images. You'll find that all that kind of stuff inside of data. So here inside of data, we can see there's an image associated with it, there's a name, there's items associated with this thing. So whatever's been clicked and dragged to this particular actor, and all types of different things, permissions and so forth. But we'll spend a lot of time looking at the actor data.data, which again is going to be kind of the kind of key data that's associated with it here. So we can see the ship has an armor class. If we open up this ship, we will see an armor class associated with the ship, and this is where it comes from. So this is just a quick way of us being able to debug it. Okay, so there'll be a lot more in that you'll need to know, but hopefully by watching me kind of stumble my way through this, we'll be able to figure it out. So what do we want to do in this? So in the next video, what I'm effectively going to be doing is trying to change some functionality inside of here. So for the ship, what we've done thus far is we've had the ability to calculate a cost. This cost is based on the hull type, which has a base cost, and then there's a series of items that are added to the ship. Each one of these items, like the plasma beam here, has a cost associated with it. So this button right here, this calculate cost, goes through, says find the base cost, run through all the items, and total up the cost. One of the items, the system drive, will actually lower the cost, but don't worry about that too much. So what we want to do is we wanted to go through and expand this functionality out based on a conversation on Reddit. So if we look through my quick notes, is what we have in this ship right now is we have the ability to generate a cost, which is automatically generated when you push this cash register button. This cash register button will say, do you want to calculate the cost? Do you want to calculate the cost and maintenance or not? So this is a simple dialogue. What we're going to do is we're going to expand this. We're going to allow people to set a variable percentage, and we're going to set up a schedule. And this will go through and calculate certain things. And then we'll go ahead and allow some buttons to basically say, I want to apply money to a payment, to a maintenance cost, and we'll have a pool. That functionality looks something like this. We're going to say, I want to have a payment, I want to have a maintenance payment, I want to have a payment schedule, so when do I expect payments to be made? I want to have a maintenance schedule, so when do I expect the frequency of maintenance payments to occur? When's the last time I made a payment? When's the last time I did a maintenance? How much money do I still owe on the ship? And I have a credit pool of money that will come into the ship. The schedules that we're going to allow are going to be pretty limited. I actually think it's just going to be a number of months that we'll set up. And the goal is with this is that one, users will be able to look and say, okay, where am I at? What do I owe? When's the next time I'll make a payment? I make a payment, I want to update those dates. But then also we can potentially do hooks in later to a system like Simple Calendar, where people could go ahead, and if you look at Simple Calendar, it adds a nice button there. You get a calendar pop up. You can kind of put events in your calendar. So that's what we're going to do. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to take these tabs. We're going to split out the cost into a new tab. So this one will just be about notes and mods, and then we'll put a new thing with cost and maintenance inside of there. And we're going to figure out how to do a couple things. Now, one thing I did not want to do is kind of embed a full calendar functionality into this system module. I'm going to kind of keep this lightweight. So I'm going to do a few assumptions. We're going to make a way of taking in data that's going to be a 4-digit year, a 2-digit month, and a 2-digit day. We're going to infer and build date objects, which are going to be the JavaScript date objects based on these 3 fields. And we'll use that information along with these schedules to go ahead and do so. And we'll probably end up making it look a little bit like this crew field here, where this is actually an input box, this is an input box, and this is an input box. The style sheet that Spice set up makes it look like it's all one input box, but it's not. The inspector is going to be your other friend. You hit inspector, you hit this tab here, you can kind of go ahead and see what is what are the underlying HTML and style sheet elements. I can click this here, it jumps over here, and this shows you this is an input box. It's styled in a way that the traditional input field, like what you see in this field, is kind of hidden, but this is effectively the input box. The thing that looks like an input box outside of here is the div. This is kind of like the box, the span, the whatever you want to call it, but this is effectively what the div element is, this wrapped around here. So I think we're going to make a calendar element that looks like this or this, but it's going to be saying I want years, months, and dates. It's not going to be super robust, so if somebody messes up something on a date, this is probably just going to complain. But again, I don't want to get into building out a whole calendar component inside of here. So to get this started, I did a couple of really simple things just to make sure that I'm up to speed. One thing is inside of this actor object, which I'll go over in a second, there's a function called calc cost. This calc cost gets called by that pop-up box. So when I go ahead and here, I hit this button, these two buttons right there are going to try to call that function. The existing is set up right now that it either passes a true or a false to the maintenance flag, and that's depending on what they call here. Let me go ahead and split my windows, might be a little easier. So when somebody goes and calls that calc cost button, so can I get this in there? Maybe not. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's gonna look a little ugly. When we go ahead and we say yes, calculate believe maintenance alone, false gets sent to here. If we say yes, calculate cost is 5%, true goes to here. So we're going to be extending this, capture some more inputs from here, and that's what's going to happen. But the first thing I did is I wanted to figure out get the basics of working with dates down inside of this class here. So the main thing I did is I said, okay, I'm going to go read this last maintenance field here, and that's where we're going ahead, and I'll try to explain this a little bit more in a second, but we're going ahead and saying this. So this refers to the particular actor that we are executing this code on, so it's ship. So when this gets executed, it's a particular ship actor that's executing this. We're looking inside of the data.data. So you remember in the console what we did a second ago was we looked at the data.data, and we were trying to get out the last maintenance field. So if we crack open this, we look for last maintenance. Oh, and this is great because I couldn't spell maintenance before, so we have two of them, but now we can see that this is the actual field. So it's just a string. So this string, I'm going to read this from the list.data.data last maintenance, which is coming from here. And this, the part of the Foundry in this system allows you to make changes. So I can go ahead and make this change, and as soon as I make this change, we can go in here and we can take a peek, and we can see that date is updated, right? So it's now 14. And you can, in this debug, you can actually go ahead and ask for the particular field directly, and it'll go ahead and give it to you. So what are we doing here? So I'm getting the data from that field, I'm putting it in a variable called last maintenance. It's const, which basically means it won't change. Let is the alternative. I'm defining a variable that will change. Then what I'm going to do is I'm taking the string field, and I'm going to generate a new variable called DA, calling it date array. I'm going to take this field, this 3200-01-14, and I'm splitting it into values with a dash. And then I'm going to use these to populate the thing. So you can see this is where the code is not robust at all. If we were to go ahead and do something like take something out of here and do this, this is a valid string. But when I try to take this and parse this in, it's going to just complain. So again, it's going to be about kind of trying to get something up and fast, then we can try to add some more robustness to it in a little bit here. So we have this date array. We're going to build a date object on it. So here we're saying, give me the first value, that's the years. Give me the second value, it's the months, but months are counted with 0. So we're going to subtract, it's 0 base, so we subtract 1. And then there's the dates. I'm going to log the date. So that shows it over here. You might have seen that already. I'm going to get the month. I'm going to add 1 to the month, and I'm going to set the month to be that new month. So that's what I'm just doing here. I'm just trying to make sure I can get a date, I can add something to it, and I can log it back. So if we go to this thing, I don't care what we're doing, we're just going to go ahead and do this. Basically, we should see 2 entries. One is, did we see a date field that looked like we expected? So did we see 3200 January 14th? Yes, we did. And do I see 1 month later? Yes, I do. So these are what this console.logs are doing. It's just to help make sure I'm on the right track. In general, we do not want to leave these in the code at the end. I am sometimes bad about that, so we'll want to clean these up at the end. But this is just to help make sure I'm on the right track, and it's a good way of kind of walking through and seeing what's happening, and kind of allows you to poke at the code. Okay, so before I get started, the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about for a minute is the things that we're going to be touching here. So we have our actors, which are again our kind of our core objects. So this is the ship. So the ship has some variables defined. It has some functions. This allows us to get the data associated with the actor. We have some notion of derived data, which is data that's associated with the actor, but it's not stored, it's calculated. So I think this, thanks to Stas and Mana, we were able to go ahead and build out some derived variables here. So like how much mass do I have on the ship is calculated. It's not stored. We have a max value. We do some things like we find items, we figure out what power they're using, and we subtract that. So when we go and we look at this ship here, and we see I have power, I can't edit this power. This is being calculated by all of the things I have inside of there. So functionality associated with the actor will be in the appropriate actor page here. A lot of this is functions that are added to help kind of do things with the ship. So like eat up life support based on the active number of crew, roll my spike travel, and so forth. There is a associated sheet object, which is kind of the functions or the things that get called to render the sheet. So we need to get data. You can do things like inject code inside of here to be able to do things on certain buttons and so forth. And that's what we'll see, right? So here we have listeners that are basically listening to the page for certain things to be clicked. When those things are clicked, we'll go ahead and trigger a function. So if we do something like delete a crew member from the ship, we go over to the crew member tab. There is a button here. Let me go ahead and inspect this button. You can see that this button has a class associated with the anchor tag. I'm going to assume you know some basics of HTML and JavaScript. This is not going to be uber basic here. And so here we have a class called item control, and then there's a class called crew delete. So when somebody clicks something with crew delete on it, it is going to basically say associate a click on crew delete. So find crew delete. When somebody clicks on it, this is a function we want to call. We want to call on crew delete. So you can go down to this function here and you can see what's happening, right? So we're making sure there's nothing else going on. We are finding the parent to get the ID of the associated crew member. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to have a dialog that's going to pop up to say, are you sure you want to delete this crew member? If they say yes, it's going to go ahead and resolve this with true. And if not, it's not going to. And here we can see that if we're going to perform the delete, so this is the outcome of this action here, we'll go ahead and delete the person and make some appropriate change to how it's rendered. So there's a lot in this. We'll try to get into it more, but this is kind of the high level thing here. So one thing that will take a minute if you haven't dealt with it before is there's, I think the right term is closures, is you'll see a lot of functions being defined in the middle of another JavaScript function. And these are functions that get executed sometimes at a later point in time. But when you define this function, it has reference to certain variables or data inside of the function it was defined inside of. So you might see if this function was out somewhere else, it might look like that can't exist, but because it's kind of defined in line as a closure inside of this function, it can get executed at a later point in time. I'll try to explain it a bit, but this is something I'm not going to be able to explain too elegantly. So here we can see on this crew delete, it'll go through, it'll do something, it'll go to the actor, which again is the ship, and it'll say remove crew. And here's the crew ID. So if we go over here and we look at this, this is saying, okay, find the crews, make sure the crew exists in there. If it does, go ahead and yank it out, and then we're going to update the crew itself. The update function is, I think it was described to me as this is updating the database. You know, we have that data associated with a particular actor, and I want to make a change to that actor. This is what we want to call. And this is an expensive operation, but this is going through and saying, go ahead and make this change. I'm going to change the data.crew count or crew.current to be a new value, and I'm changing the list of crew members inside of there. And then this will go ahead and go through do it, and then I'm just going to make sure that if that crew member was associated with a role, I'm going to set it to be empty. Just this was done in case you deleted and re-added a crew. Okay, so this goes through. These two things could probably be merged to avoid two calls because it's a little bit expensive, but so be it. This update will make sure that the data associated with the actor is updated, and it will make sure that everyone that's connected to that current game session will see that refresh data. So we have the ship.sheet, we have functions, there's different code that can happen inside of here. It will call things on the actor or do other things with different code. And then if you look, and I'm going to use Control P a lot, that's kind of my shortcut for finding things, there will be a ship.sheet.html. This is the actual HTML segment that gets rendered when you click on ship. So when we go here and we click on this, we are pulling up the ship sheet HTML. So these are kind of, my inputs for the name. There's a lot of wrappers for Foundry that do things like, okay, I'm going to define it as a name. It's going to be a typed text. You can give me the value of whatever's coming from the actor.name value. Let's look for a better one that might be a little bit easier. So like hit points, right? So hit points are stored in a health field that has a health value and a health max. So if we look here, we're building an input box. It's a number. It's saying the name of this value is going to be called this, and you're going to be pulling out the value from health.value inside of the data.data and giving it as the value. This syntax here is from this, I don't know if you want to call it a scripting language or not, but it's called handlebars. So handlebars is the rendering, scripting, whatever, I don't know. So basically it's HTML mixed in with some minor tags. The bracket with this just says go ahead and get from the context the data, the variables that are passed to handlebars, go ahead and pull this out and render it. If it had 3 curly braces instead of 2, it would say it's HTML, go ahead and render the HTML, and if it's 2, it's going to do this. If you see a word in the front, that's a function. Those functions might be already embedded, or they could be added in the handlebars helpers. So we have a series of helpers defined in here. So like you could have a debug helper. These are basically functions that will get invoked inside of there. And there's other kind of some basic utilities like if, for. Let me go down to where the weapons are, because then you can see a for loop. So here we go. So here we're doing a loop over some weapons. So the ship has a series of an item type of ship weapons. We're going to loop through these. For each one, we're going to say, give me that ship item as an item, and we'll have an enigmatic ID that comes out. This is just an enumerate counter, and then we go ahead and render it. So for each one of the ship items, this code inside of this each to slash each gets executed. So for this first pass, we go ahead and we go through, we pull it out. We can pull out the item.id from the first item inside of here. We can pull out the damage, the name, so forth. And this is what an if statement looks like. So here we're saying if there's an ammo type and it's not equal to none, go ahead and render the things inside of here. Unless this flag is set, go ahead and do this. So if there was an item.data.data.broken and it was rendered true, or it has a value greater than 0, this would not pop inside of there. So that's the basics of handlebars. There's not a lot to it. It's a little bit kludgy, but you can go ahead and figure it out. So at a high level, what we're going to do is we're going to make some changes to this ship sheet. HTML, we will make some changes probably to the ship sheet TS to be this function that's going to go ahead and pop up. And then we're going to go ahead and probably make some changes inside of the ship inside of here to go ahead and make those changes. Now we're going to change the data model associated with the ship itself. And so some of this will also live inside of actor types, which are going to be the things that define what an actor is and the values associated with it. Now these are going to be built out of bases, so it's going to use kind of a concept of almost like polymorphism. So here we have a base called a vehicle template base. So saying that basically all vehicles will have these things. They're going to have a cost that's a number. It's going to have a health, which has a value and a max, an AC, which is a value and a max, speed and armor and so forth. And these things are all going to change. Now, just looking at this, I realize that armor should be value max and AC maybe should be constant, but again, we can kind of figure these things out as we go. Now, if we look down in here further, we'll find that we have a ship type somewhere in here, and then we have our ship data. So this ship data is going to extend that base. So it has everything in the base, and then it's going to have some new things inside of here. This is going to be the types that we will allow. We're trying not to allow these types inside of there, and some other variables. Power. Now here we only have a max because, again, the power current value is going to be derived. So here it's in a different interface called computed. So we go through and we define all of the things that we want to be in a ship. So there's a ship class. It belongs to, it has to be one of these 4 strings. There's a ship hull type. It has to belong to one of these and hull type strings. There's an operating cost, maintenance, roles. So we'll have to make some changes inside of here. And then if you just want to follow through, we'll see that the ship data then later gets used, saying that we have a ship type for an actor and a source config, and that's going to be a combination of ship data and ship computed. Now looking at this might want to change right there as well. So See, I'm going to find a bunch of bugs when I do this. So I'm going to make that change right here in a second. And then lastly, when we make a change to the actors types, we want to make sure that in our template, this is saying that when you create a new actor or item, these are kind of the default values you should use. So here we can see inside of template, we have characters, NPCs, and ships. And so if we go down to ships, we have a template. That's the vehicle base that we're going to borrow from. And then for the ship, we're going to say these are the default values that I'm going to give it when I create a new one. You want to go back up to the templates. You will see you have a vehicle template. So when you create a vehicle, and again, remember all the vehicles have that kind of shared common component that we call the vehicle base right here. That's what we're saying. So there's a cost. When I create a new ship, its cost is going to default to 0. When I create a health, it's going to be here. So great, I found another bug inside of this. We have an armor value and an AC value, and these aren't mismatched. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that when I stop this. Great, and so items are in here in a similar way. Okay, so that's going to be what we're going to try to do. Is we're going to try to make some changes to the cost calculator, and these are going to be the touch points that I'm going to make. We'll kind of walk through the development process. It's going to be ugly. But hopefully watching the ugliness and listening to me talk out loud will help you see how to make extensions and changes to the SWN Foundry package and potentially other Foundry packages as well.